Well, what I'm going to speak about today is bumper modification and try to lead you down a pathway that'll get you better results and cost less money, less expense. The big trend, the hot trend right now, basically is to smooth in the studs. It's been going on for quite a while, but now it's chop, slice, and dice, and tucking these bumpers in. Create a lot of extra expense if it's not done properly. So I'm going to try to give you some guidelines of what you can do to get down that pathway to get the result that you're looking for and not cost you an arm and a leg. Plating's expensive. Good plating can be even pricier. So a lot of our cost is involved in metal finishing, and that is us sanding the metal, getting it ready to plate. That's where the expense is at. You can do a lot of this yourself. I would love for you to do it yourself. I don't want to keep your parts for 12 weeks. So you can do some of this prep work on your own, save yourself a buck or two, still get the same results as if we had done it totally in-house. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off here with getting started on the right foot. We'll talk about modifying bumpers. I'm going to talk about the tools that we've used and also keys to get those surfaces ready to plate when they come to us. The best money that you can spend on bumper modification is having your bumpers stripped all the way to the raw metal, and that's using an electro-strip process. A lot of plating companies use electro-strip. If you're going and the guy's telling you they're going to blast that material off there, blast that old plating off, going to, the monument company where they use sand, that just destroys the metal. Some guys will try to grind the plating off. As that nickel gets older, it gets harder and harder. Uses a lot of material up, a lot of discs, throwing money away. You're better off to find a company and have them electro-strip that bumper all the way down to the base metal. Now, when you're doing electro-stripping, you want to find somebody that has a tank large enough, and these 50s and 60s cars, all big one pieces, a lot of them are very long. You don't want a company that strips the bumper halfway at a time, because you'll end up with this big X right in the middle, and then you have a low spot. And that's real hard to get out, and again, it's going to cost you a little bit more money right there. If you can get stripped to the clean metal, that's just the very best way to start off your restoration process. And what you're looking at here is an electroplating strip tank, sulfuric acid, water, and glycerin, and it reverses off the chrome and the nickel, but it's also removing the metal at the same time. It does not recognize different types of plating or different types of metal. Its job is to remove metal, okay? Water and glycerin. We take it off the opposite way that we put it on. So it's an AC to DC rectifier, and now your part has become your anode, and the bags or the baskets are the cathode. So it pulls it off. If you switch the cables around, it puts it back on. If you're going to go and do this correctly, you might as well glass bead or sandblast the back of your bumper to get off all the rust, the tar, the grease, the grime, and the oil and the corruption that's gathered up on there. So you basically are starting with a totally clean slate. Right, there's a lot of horror stories about stripping. As this part is stripping, if you basically have a part and it has a bare spot in it, you're going to see what's going to happen when you put it in there like that. That's why if you're modifying a bumper and you try to grind that plating off there and then have an electro strip, that's still the wrong way. You got to have it stripped all the way to the base to begin with. Let's see. When you're looking at this bumper, like the cons of choosing not to electro-strip, you're going to look here at a bumper that basically the spot welds have been welded, ground down, and you're looking at raw steel prior to being plated or stripped. So you can see on this particular bumper the chrome, the nickel, and where the stud's been welded into the part, and then this particular customer decided to grind that weld down where he had put the bolt in the bumper, and that is raw steel right there. So as we move on here, you'll see even though this has been stripped, you can see the different levels as it's stripped off there, and that's the original copper plate. But that spot where he actually ground that bolt smooth is going to be about a 1/16 of an inch lower. And we've got some samples up here that you can see what happens when you strip like that. So if you're going to modify it, strip it first and then do your modification. This grinding thing just creates a lot of valleys in the part. Somebody's got to build that up, or you're going to have to air file it more. But that surface has got to be built up. It's a lot like auto body work. So you don't want to create more work for yourself. We all know that these cores are getting to be further and far between good cores. If you can find a better core to start with, one that's not been twisted up or tow truck damaged or hooked on a chain and twisted past the point of repair, you'd be better off to sometimes start with a decent, better core. There are cases where you can't find a better core, and you need to try to find a shop that actually has a bumper press and basically a blacksmith, because when you get into repair and straightening this type of bumper, it takes somebody that's really an artist with a hammer. Okay, so then we're going to get into why a core that hasn't been plated. Well, a lot of plating shops will grind waves into bumpers, and this core issue, a lot of these bumpers maybe had been, or cars had been in wrecks earlier, they had been to an auto body shop and they got basically a repair or auto body bumper, been swapped out one way or the other. It might have been done 20, 30 years ago. A lot of those bumpers were ground, and they were ground really thin and wavy, and that again creates more work. They can be repaired, just a lot more block sanding. Modifying bumpers. So now we're going to talk about some of the essentials, do's and don'ts when modifying bumpers. These are going to be ones that could save you money at the plating shop. Again, I cannot stress to you how important it is to get these bumpers stripped to bare metal to start with. Okay, so we're going to talk about welding. When you're doing your welding, you need to weld these pieces together in a manner that doesn't get the bumper so hot that it sinks it in, again creating a low spot, or warps it. Do not use stainless steel welding rod. Stainless plates in a different manner than steel. If we don't know that that bumper has a stainless steel weld in it, when we go to copper plate it, it's going to bubble and blister. When you're plating stainless, you have to go through a strike process. We have really no way to tell if that weld is stainless or not until we run up into a blister. So you want to stay away from the stainless steel welds. Now when you're doing your welding, the best process that we've found over the years is to tack it initially, let it cool, and then weld it small sections at a time. Some of these bumpers, again, if they've been previously plated, have been ground smooth. Some of them weren't very thick to start with. So you need to be careful about how you're welding these bumpers so that you're not creating low spots. Yes. Yep. Right. Yep. Exactly right. So we're going to take a look here at a bumper that has been too hot, been modified. The bolts are in it. This bumper has been electro-stripped. It came to us with the bolts already welded in it, already ground, and after we stripped it and blocked it, what you're seeing there are low spots. Now, you can only block and sand these so much before the thing falls through. So at this case, we have to stop right there with the initial metal prep and start copper plating it, or we'll use lead solder to fill it up and then sand it back down. Sometimes this is unavoidable. We're going to kind of move on here, and we're going to show you now that when you do get into that situation that you have a bumper that has a low spot, or maybe the repair needs to be brought up, what we're using right here is a 60-40 solder. And you can see that he's laid probably about a pound or two of lead solder onto this bumper. Now this bumper we're looking at had been previously plated probably back in the 70s. It was never really stripped. It was ground, and then it was replated. So it was a chopped up wavy mess. So we did actually go and strip it all the way down to the raw steel. We blocked it out. It was so warped and so wavy, we've now, basically like auto body work, we're using filler. We've used lead to put onto this, and now we're going to sand and block that lead back down. Do the same thing. There's just, yeah, it's just a really good way. Yeah, you know, a lot of adhesion on plating has to do with the bumper being clean. You know, that your certain processes are maintained well with filtration through your copper, that, you know, your acid that etches the metal is not weak. So there's a lot of variables that fall into that. There is no excuse for that not to stick to that. Now, you can check with the local plating shop or whatever plating shop you're going to use, but we prefer that when you do your repair, something along this line is that you dress the weld and let me flatten it out. We have a lot of people that try to just grind that weld down, and when you're grinding on that weld, you're creating a low spot. The weld's a little bit harder, and it takes longer to grind down. Everywhere around that weld's still grinding down, and you create a low spot. We're going to take a look at something else here real quick. This, if you have a bumper and you're going to modify it, you got to straighten it first if it's bent or twisted. You cannot modify it first and then come back and try to straighten it out. You know, if you're welding seams, if you're taking a 3-piece and making it a 1-piece, or if you are, you know, installing the bumper braces or basically chopping and cutting them, the bumper needs to be stripped once again, and it needs to be straightened either at a bumper shop, or if you've got that capability at home, it needs to be straightened before you modify it. Because if it's bent and we get it and it's been modified, we have to straighten it, and when we have to straighten it, then your welds are going to crack and you're going to lose all that work. We just keep going back to how important it is to strip. You just do not want to try to grind that plating off there. You're just going to create a lot of work for yourself as you get into your modifications. It's going to create a lot of waves. These welds, you can dress them down. If you have some porosity in them, you can touch them in with, but we prefer for you just to leave them up, and we'll dress them down. If you are going to dress them down, we're going to show you how to do that. That's something that takes a little bit of practice, but it's something that's very easily done if you have the right tools. Yeah, you have to move around there and not get that metal hot. Okay, so this bumper had the bolts welded in, and the customer had ground the weld down. Then we came back and electro-stripped it, and it created holes where he had ground it down. So that's, again, really important that you strip to the base and don't grind too much. You can pretty well tell when you start getting too thin that it's going to cave in on you. More bumper modifications. Real popular to tuck these bumpers in close to the body of the car. I would not tuck them in much more than about 1/4 of an inch. It's very important that you tell whoever is plating your bumper that you've got it fit to the car. This electroplating with copper, which we use, again, like filler and primer, we basically plate it up with copper and we block the copper down to get it smooth and flat and get all the waves out. The edges build up continuously. We have to cut the edges down every time. Some of these bumpers that are tucked in under the body, they're not only growing in width, they're growing in height. It's important to communicate with whoever's doing your plating that you do have that fit and tucked in there. 1/4 inch is a nice safety gap there. We prefer, basically, we will mic the bumper and measure it when we know it's being tucked in there. So when you go to your plating shop and you've got a modified tuck bumper, you might take some measurements, give them to them, tell them what you're doing. They know what type of buildup they're going to be allowed on the part. It's nice to get back a really pretty bumper. It's not so nice to get a pretty bumper back that doesn't fit your car anymore. Well, you know, when we get into tools for block sanding, and it really starts with the base metal. We prefer to block the base metal to start with, and then we'll build it up with copper. So, you know, we're basically using an air file. There's a Durablock in the upper left-hand corner. There's the old faithful 2x4. You're looking at a few different types of discs here. You're looking at a phenolic disc on the bottom, and then you're looking at some hard ABS or polypropylene discs. Now, a soft foam pad, when you're doing your blocking, all it's going to do is follow the waves and the contour of the bumper. You're not going to achieve anything. You'll just basically have nice, smooth waves. The nice thing about the Durablocks, there's all different forms and styles of them. You can actually sand those blocks to fit if you have a corner or a recess, and you put your sandpaper on there and sand back and forth. So we'll take Durablocks and modify them to fit the contours of the bumpers. The air file on flat surfaces works really well. This particular air file that we just saw has a solid aluminum plate on it. Most of those air files come with a foam pad. That foam pad does you no good at all. It just follows the contour and the waves of the bumper. So you have to have a hard surface for that to fit on. What you're looking right here, you know, is again using a rigid tool is the key to achieving a wave-free finish. Sometimes you can't find these discs, so we just make them in-house. You can go to a hardware store and buy a piece of plastic to make these with. Okay, so then we're going to go back to the air file. The standard pad has been replaced with a solid aluminum pad, and that is a 2x4 right there. It's just hard to find anything to replace that. Then you get into some of the smaller wood blocks. Wood block works nice if you don't want to buy the Durablock, but it's still pretty inexpensive. They are pretty hard for getting in tight corners. It's hard to replace that wood block. So just like doing a show quality paint job, most of our expense is in the prep of the metal, and it's the work underneath the plating that makes the difference in a nice high quality bumper. Bumper repair is pretty difficult. Most people are not going to have a 20-ton press at home to hold one of these down. But you can dolly out small dents, like dollying out dents on a fender. You're using something as a backer, using various hammers in order to peck these dents out. It's a slow, tedious process. Harder and faster is not always the key. You're pretty much slowly pecking away here to get these dents removed out, and then you can come back and block out the surface afterward. So here we're looking at is using a high-speed grinder with a solid disc backing plate. It's a light 80 grit surface. I really don't like to use anything coarser than an 80 grit because at some point in time somebody has to get those 80 grit lines out. Or if you're using a 36 grit, somebody's going to have to get the waves and the lines out. So we prefer to use a light 80 grit disc on something like this or on this type of bumper. When you do this initial grind, you can develop a pattern. Practice makes perfect. Generally, we'll try to make strokes somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12 to 16 inches, and you can see the pattern of that grind. Now, you can come back and go back across it again. You can't go across it 10 or 15 times, but most of the time these bumpers get about 4 to 5 passes with an 80 grit. And you've developed a pattern, and now you've revealed a low spot in your metal. Back to the dolly. If the metal is thin, you're not going to be able to sand it anymore. So eventually you are going to have to dolly out these dents. You can hammer and dolly that spot and regrind the surface and then move on to your next end of your bumper. When you're blocking, using the air file, after you do your initial grind, you can go to an 80 grit, and then we generally will go to a 120 from there. The air file, hard block, you're going to try to get your surfaces as flat as possible. So once you've gotten all the waves worked out and the surfaces blocked, you're ready to use a DA. You can use either a 5-inch or an 8-inch. You want to use the DA needs to be set in oscillate, and now you're basically trying to remove the lines from previously block sanding. 120 grit to get out the 80 grit, then we generally go to a 180 grit. You can get all the way down to about a 320. That's a really nice surface for a plating shop to work with. The smaller DA, using a 120 again, you can get into smaller, tighter spots with a smaller pad. So we've kind of watched this bumper slip through there, battled out the dents, got out the twists and the waves, ground it, found more dents, dollied those, ground it, air filed it, and DA'd it, and now that bumper's ready to go for plating.